Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jessie Jim, and I am the NAPS Project Field Coordinator. I would also like to thank Marcy for setting some time aside again to do another presentation on cattle livestock vaccination. So Marcy is going to provide today, and she is the New Mexico State University Extension livestock specialist. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen over to you, Marcy.
Okay, so I'm going to start with kind of establishing a calendar for you all, and it's going to include not just vaccinations, but maybe a little bit of nutrition and just general management tips as it relates to cattle. We're going to start in the winter months. That's a good place to kind of begin, in that you have a little bit of downtime other than feeding your cattle to prepare for calving season and the breeding season and the like. So I recommend really setting up this calendar, making notes, just having it written down somewhere as a reminder. For those of you that have been doing this for many years, it comes natural, but it's also good to have it written down. So in terms of nutrition, you're going to start ramping up supplementation this time of year for your cows, so you ensure that they get in good body condition prior to calving. And then the mineral supplementation, you also want to ramp up a specialized mineral. It's called a breeder mineral. A lot of your commercial feed companies carry such a mineral that's a little higher in copper, zinc, and magnesium and vitamins to help improve your breeding and conception. They will also help you with cows if they're a little bit low on something, that they'll clean out a little better once they calve. They won't have retained placentas. And then just start making an inventory of supplies you'll need for calving. And if you've ever run into scours, which is rare in the desert, but it's good to go ahead and create some sort of management plan for your calves as well if you run into some sickness. Okay, is there a purpose? Is there supposed to be slides? The screen is black. Okay. What about you, Jessie? Are you seeing black slides? The slides are up. Okay, so maybe something on your end. Michaela.
What I'm seeing, Michael, I do see your slide on the mark your calendar, and now, yeah, it's up. Michael, if you could just let us know if you see something. If not,
I haven't been doing a very good job, but I will share these slides, and I think she's recording this as well. So hopefully you can configure it or get it to where it's working. Okay, now my slides are. Okay. We're gonna try again. All right.
Okay, we see your slides.
All right, hold on. It's not wanting to advance. If you give me like 30 seconds, I apologize. I've got to kick the dogs out. They're really not behaving.
Okay, Michael can see them. We're just waiting for you to share them again, Marcy.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I got home like 20 minutes ago and they're going nuts. So, all right, we'll try again.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Okay, oh, come on. Why are you not? Oh, yeah.
It's
Okay, there we go. All right, so moving forward, here's an idea. So scours is something that's created by coccidiosis. It's, like I said, occasionally it rears its ugly head, and when it does, if you have a particularly wet spring, it can do so. It can be fatal to your calves if not treated, lambs too. And so one thing, and it's very, very contagious even to humans. So one thing we recommend is that you just, maybe calve out in one pasture, move them once they're calved and everything's good. Calves are healthy, they're mothered up good. Kick them out in a bigger pasture where they can spread out a little bit. That's the gist of your management plan to handle scours. But usually it will start to show itself within the first 7 to 14 days. So having them somewhat close in that first 2 weeks, it's obvious, you want to kind of keep an eye on them, but also be able to easily catch and treat them if need be. And so it can happen in sheep, goats, and cattle. And it's just something to be aware of. Sulfa antibiotic, the sulfa drug can help clean that up pretty easily. Okay, so we're moving into spring. We took a little bit of a leap from February, but moving into spring on the nutrition side, you're looking at, you don't need to feed quite as much protein as hopefully the grass is coming on, but you could boost your fat in your supplementation protocols to your young females, just to kind of keep that energy level up. Continue with the breeder mineral that's a little higher in that copper and zinc for immunity and reproduction. In terms of your calf health, these are some products that have proven to be, I'm sorry that it didn't line up, proven to be pretty effective in that branding pen in terms of introduction of immunity to those calves. Enforce is a Zoetis product. It's an intranasal, so it goes up the nose. And it's good to prevent respiratory disease minus BVD. The drug itself just is not effective to carry that fifth viral disease. So the only ones you're getting protected for are the respiratory BS, bovine viral, RSV, VP, and PI3, and then IBRs. So, and then the 7-way clostridials are your black legs that will cover that. And you can get somnus booster, you can get a tetanus booster. Those are the covers your bacterial diseases. So you'll want to give them that. And then an injectable wormer is always good because you can be more precise with your dose versus pour-on. It's not as handy sometimes. This would be given both to calves and cows, but certainly this would be something to consider going into the summer months, is to get them wormed somehow. We recommend the injectables simply because if you underdose a warmer product, they can become resistant, and we don't want that. The PI test, if you all that joined us last time remember, this is for persistently infected. This is for bovine viral diarrhea to track your carriers of this disease. It's an ear notch test that you send into the veterinary diagnostic lab in Albuquerque. And it's good to monitor this disease in your herd. And you can do so by doing this with your calves, pulling that ear notch sample, send it off. And if you have a positive, that means a cow and certainly a calf is a carrier of this disease, and they can spread it to the rest of the herd. And ultimately what happens is it can cause some reproductive failure in your cows that next calving season. So May and August, if you have a seasonal breeding system, which we always highly recommend on the nutrition side, you're finally getting the cool season grasses along with warm season starting to ramp up after the monsoons. And so you really don't need to if the monsoons don't come, the grass doesn't come, You would supplement with a low protein, high fat to your heifers, but you can back that off certainly if there's plenty of feed. But mineral supplementation is a must to maintain health and condition in those cows and heifers. And then on the health side, from May to August, you have your branding. Again, we talked about the Enforce, the 7-way, and the ivermectin, but you can't forget your cows, okay? So on your cow side, if you do capture the cows, it's a good opportunity to worm and vaccinate them. Ideally, not everybody always captures the cows and works them at branding, but if you do, it's a good opportunity to go ahead and worm them as well. There, you have TripGuard, which is a trichomoniasis vaccine that you can give to your cows to hopefully protect them from that disease. However, it requires a booster. And so that would mean you'd have to bring them back in about a month later and hit them again. And so that's something to consider, but certainly you would want to give them some reproductive vaccines to ensure a good breeding opportunity with a leptovibrio vaccine in terms of preventing these diseases that cause reproductive failure. And that would happen again in the spring. For your heifers, these would be your yearlings, and you're getting ready to breed them for the first time. Again, this might be a good opportunity if you didn't get a PI test with them as calves to go ahead and do that now. They really only need one their lifetime, because either they're a carrier or they're not. That's why we always recommend branding to kind of figure that out. But if you hadn't done that yet with them, that's a good time to do that. Certainly worm them. And then the vaccination protocol would be take that opportunity to give them a booster of your modified lives that you normally give. And also your 7-8-way products, your Clostridials booster as well. Worm them. And then they too would start the reproductive vaccines in that cycle with a leptovibrio vaccine. And since this would be the first exposure of this vaccine, they would need a booster. So for example, excuse me, you could bring your heifers in, hit them with these shots, and then at branding, hit them again with the cows, and then they'd be well boosted for breeding season. But you can't forget the bulls at this time of year. You really need to make this a standard in your protocol, is to go ahead. I know sometimes facilities don't allow for you to handle the mature bulls. Maybe it's a disposition issue. They are a little more challenging, but it is important that if you have a veterinarian coming out to do a breed soundness exam and a trick test, then take advantage of that and go ahead and booster them with their annual respiratory, clostridial, and reproductive vaccines, okay? And then maybe do either a pour-on or an injectable. And again, I'm using injectables a lot. That's a lot of shots, and I appreciate that, but the injectable is just more precise. Right? So the pour-on, if you go from giving all your cows that are, say, 1,200 pounds, their pour-on, and then the bulls come through and they're weighing 1,800, you can see where you'd be underdosing these animals. And so with an injectable, you're more likely to be a little more accurate with that. And again, if you hadn't PI tested your bulls yet, you might want to go ahead and do so. Now, I threw in a couple, since it is a livestock, I think, presentation. I threw some sheep in because I think a lot of you have sheep as well. And so the same is true in terms of your vaccine and management protocols as it is with cattle. You follow the stage of production as you would with the cows. Now, Sheep and goats are a little more intensive simply because they have a shorter gestation. They've got a lot more going on in a shorter period of time. And so there's more opportunities to set a calendar for them for their vaccinations. You have pre-breeding, breeding, pre-lambing, lambing, lactation and weaning, and then post-weaning. And all of this happens in less than a year. Excuse me. And so it's a little more intensive, but certainly just as important. So for the sheep calendar, you have pre-breeding in August and September. These guys are seasonal breeders, and so it's a little more established. Your protocol can be because your window of opportunity for breeding is fairly narrow. So on the nutrition side, you would want to increase nutrition a little bit. You can do it fairly simple with just 1.5 pounds to 1 pound of corn prior to breeding. That causes what's called a flushing effect, which means they'll ovulate a little better and more productively. And then really nothing added at breeding. But in terms of health, you could deworm at this time. You would also want to vaccinate your ewes and rams with a reproductive vaccination during that pre-breeding phase. And then you really want to try and do, if you can find a veterinarian that's done it before, has the proper equipment, you can do breed soundness exams on your rams. And we recommend that because you have incidences where if rams aren't fertily sound, they aren't adequately breeding your ewes. And so it could be a loss of production simply on the ram side. Ideally, you want to breed your ewe lambs after your ewes, okay, in that scenario of breeding in October, November. So for pre-lambing, just before they drop their lambs, you want to increase nutrition to those ewes by 0.5 pound per 100 pounds of body weight, again, of just grain. Corn is fine. And then in terms of vaccinations, for all animals, you would give them the enterotoxemia. The 7-way works just fine, that you can buy for cattle as well. But you want to make sure it has that Perfringens C and D, and then also the enterotoxemia to be covered. And then the tetanus is also helpful. For lambing, depending on the condition of your ewes, it's not a bad idea to continue to grain them. If they're in good shape, no need to really worry about that. And consider deworming again at that time. And then for your lambs, creep feeding is optional, but a lot of people like it just to give the ewes a break and add some growth to those lambs. You just have to pencil what that'll look like. Corn's fairly expensive right now, so it does have to make sense. And then deworm your lambs in that weaning period. And now they would start the process of their first introduction to the vaccines. And then post-weaning, you can do a body condition. It's a score of 1 to 5 on your ewes to make sure that they're staying in good shape nutritionally. This is just another schematic kind of showing when all the activity happens in a sheep and goat herd in terms of vaccinations. We do have a publication if you're more interested in a little more in-depth detail of the calendar and the information behind it in our extension publications. All right, flipping back to calves and on the cattle side, the branding is your first time of putting hands on those calves and your first opportunity to boost the immunity, because by then the immunity they receive from their colostrum has started to go way down. And so they really need a little additional help in terms of vaccinations. But keep in mind that this is the first time they've been handled by people, and it is a very high stress event. And whether it's branding or weaning, stress increases the hormone cortisol, which can actually reduce the immune system of that calf and the ability to really get full use out of the vaccines that you're giving. So again, those stressors, you think about separation from mom, crowding, this noise, the chute. Certainly castration and dehorning is a stressor that I think we take a little bit for granted, in that contributes to potentially reducing the effectiveness of these vaccines, and then obviously heat stress. So whenever you handle your animals, it doesn't matter if it's at weaning, if it's at calving or at branding, whenever you put your hands on these animals, always be mindful of using it quiet and slow. Less people certainly is more effective. Facilities play a big role in stress. And so these are things always to consider when you're handling your animals. And like I said, I know this is a little bit of repetition from last time, but it's important to stress these things in order to really improve the immunity of those calves. So the earlier you castrate, whether it be cattle or sheep or goats, the better, right? And so you want to make sure that you follow proper protocols in doing so. And there's really no advantage in terms of growth, muscling, and all that by waiting. In fact, the stress is so much increased. The older these animals get, they go backwards for several weeks, trying to recuperate from the procedure the longer you wait to do it. So you can do it at birth. Not too many people do that, but you can certainly do it at the branding pen. Tools of choice, like I said in the previous presentation, I prefer a knife with iodine, disinfecting the knife in between, fully cleaning out the scrotum, making sure you get both testicles. Do not cut the cord, and by any means, you always want to pull and snap so it will roll back on itself and reduce bleeding. And so whenever you're introducing any kind of metal object, or even the band can create wounds that open that area up and expose it to a whole host of insults, but tetanus being probably the most common. Tetanus is everywhere. It's in the ground. It's a bacterial-based disease, and it's horrible. If you've ever had an animal go through tetanus, it's very invasive and fast-acting. And so we want to prevent that if at all possible. And we can do that with proper vaccination. So improper castration can result in a whole host of health issues for animals. In this case, this calf they didn't have both testicles removed. It adhered to his scrotum, and now he could still potentially breed animals. It's pretty rare, it'd be low, but it's still there. And then he would have obviously the attitude issues with testosterone from the testes. Horns are something, again, as part of your management plan. If they are in your breeding program, if you have horned cattle, you can breed it out of them with a polled animal because the polled gene is dominant. That's one way to manage that. But a lot of people like to have their cows horned for protection purposes against predators, and that's fine. So that means you're just going to have to manage the calves, since 90% of them are going to be leaving the ranch, and there's a good chunk of them that will have horns, and you want to manage for that. We do a fairly good job of dehorning in the West. As you go east, that goes down. And the health issues, those calves, as you go east, go up when they come to a feedlot, simply because they typically still have the horns on and they have to be removed at the feed yard, and it's an added stress because, again, the older the animal these procedures are done to, the higher the stress level. So like I said, it's not at the time of, say, they're 3 months old, they have buttons, what they're called buttons. It's just kind of attached to the skin, and you can scoop them out, and it still bleeds quite a little, but it's not as invasive versus if you wait even a few months and they're only sticking out maybe 2 inches, by then you're now dealing with bone, you're now dealing with sinus cavity. And so this again is a much more invasive process. There's a lot more bleeding and stress. Oops. All right. So we're going to move on to kind of addressing the immunity again as it relates to weaning, because you can see, like I said, they do get a significant boost from mom at birth, but that drops off over time and they really need additional help through vaccination. And so we want to protect them as best we can. And so here they're probably getting their first shot of vaccine. And then that second shot really gives them a good boost to keep that immunity going. In terms of vaccination protocols and maintaining your booster program, again, there's several out there. This is our resource for you all. And it allows you to follow a specific protocol that's listed here on this website. You don't necessarily have to join the program. These resources are there for you to give you some guidance on what shots that are recommended and what your buyers will really appreciate knowing that they've had. And this program simply verifies that they have had those shots, and it's a third party, so it adds a little more value in terms of for the buyer knowing that these calves actually had the shots in the protocol. So one thing, as you build your calendar, you really want to discuss this with your veterinarian. Brands of product, types of products, all of these can vary within region, and your veterinarian knows more than anybody in terms of what the new threats might be, what the new products certainly are, and that can make those recommendations. And those really need to happen fairly frequently, maybe not yearly, but at least every other year, something to stay in touch with your veterinarian, just to stay on top of what changes might be needed in your protocol. Okay, let's move on to the vaccination component. And so we hear a lot about lately, particularly with COVID, I think a lot of people are learning new things about vaccinations and boosters and all these things. And the animal industry has known it for years, and the value of vaccine and the differences between them. And so with modified live, this is the types of viral vaccines for animals that we really promote. And the reason that is they're either chemically altered or genetically altered to most closely reflect that actual virus. They don't get sick from the virus, but they are allowed, their body is allowed to go through a better recognition process than the killed virus drugs offer. And so for calves in particular, we really like seeing modified lives as the first 2 shots in these animals for boosting immunity of the viral diseases that they cover. There is more management to handling modified lives. They're a little more sensitive, not only to heat, but to light. And also, they don't have a long shelf life in terms of once they're mixed. And also there can be some issues with pregnancy in cows, depending on the product, because what can happen is they can, you give the virus or you give the shot, and the animal actually might act sick for a few days. And I know I've gotten a flu shot and I was really sick for several days, but I know my body wasn't really fighting the flu specific. It was learning how to react to this foreign body from the shot. And animals do the same thing. So they might act a little puny after you give them a modified live, but to me, I don't mind seeing that simply because I know that they are actually got the vaccine in appropriate dose. and that they are starting to build a good immunity for that. But as a consequence, in some of these vaccines, during this process, they shed enough of the type of that virus in that they can create a negative effect in the cows. So just be wary of that when you're purchasing a vaccine, that you make sure you read these labels and that they're appropriate, that if you are in a situation where you're vaccinating your calves and you're putting them back on mom, which is a lot of people do that it's safe for cows. So in terms of the booster, this is what's happening. The modified live really gives you a nice response. This would be, say, at branding, but then over time it does lag off. And then it's that second dose that the body says, aha, this is something I really need to learn about and build a defense for. And so that's where, a single shot, whether it be the clostridials or the viral vaccines, if you don't give a booster, it does you no good. So for example, this was something that happened to me, and it was unfortunate. But when I taught school at Colby, we tried different things to let the students learn the different ways of doing things. One of it was castrating at different times. We castrated a handful of calves at birth, we castrated a handful at branding, and then we castrated a handful at weaning. And so what we did was we vaccinated for tetanus at weaning, and we used a bander on those, cow crate bander on those older calves that hadn't yet been cut. Well, unfortunately, because that calf hadn't gotten a full booster of tetanus, he was vulnerable. You think you're protected by the one shot, but it was not enough to protect that calf, and he ended up getting tetanus, and he didn't survive. And so had he been on his second shot with tetanus, he likely would have been able to fight off that disease and not gotten sick. And so that was a rough lesson for all of us. And it just demonstrated the importance of having a booster to prevent disease. The needles play just an important role as the vaccines in terms of drug administration. And so managing those vaccines, managing the needles, all plays a role in getting the most out of those vaccines. So both the clostridials and the modified lives need to be in a cold, dark space. That temperature needs to be somewhat consistent but cool. And then you want to make sure that you label your guns clearly, because they do look similar but might have different doses. And then in terms of needles, this picture shows a new needle, and then once used, it's already dirty with a little barb, and then you're dealing with a blunt instrument basically at the 6th time it's dirty. And so good rule of thumb, fill your syringe guns with, it's usually 8 to 10 doses, and then make just a habit of changing the needles. Or if it gets to the point where you can't physically put that needle in the calf very effectively without giving it a good push, it's time to change the needle. Disinfecting sounds great, but it's really sort of counterproductive when you're giving vaccines, because that disinfectant can ultimately kill the vaccine that you're giving. But and then you don't want to mix vaccines. They tend to counteract each other, to the point that we recommend that you really give vaccines a good 2 to 3 inches apart from one another on the same side of the neck, or ideally different shots on different sides of the neck. And then on your modified lives, if you mix them, that's it, you're committed. And it has only about a 2 to 3 hour shelf life. And so plan your purchases of your vaccines appropriately based on the number of cattle you think you can work in that time. And you don't want to mix it all up at once, certainly, because if you do, and you run late, cows are slow to come through, your day goes long, all of a sudden you have, say, 2 or 3 bottles sitting in the cooler that are old effectively and no good. And that's a very expensive thing to happen. And so I always like to get a bottle that I know comfortably we can get through 50 head in an hour or 2. And then I bust it up after that into 10 and 20 dose or even 5 doses, because you just never know. It's a little more expensive doing it that way, but you waste far less product by having some options. Okay. So if we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hands on how many people have been through the Beef Quality Assurance Program. If you have not, I recommend this strongly. It's a good way to stay current with the latest in health. And something that's interesting with beef quality assurance is when I was a kid, when it started, in the early 80s, we were given shots in the rear end and in the muscle, didn't think anything of it. And then as the program grew and developed, now it's hard to find too many people that still do that, whether they're BQA certified or not. So it's been very influential in our industry. And they've given us tips for management that I think you could all find beneficial at the ranch. And then at the kill plants, they're now requiring all animals that go through those facilities have been through BQA management. And so the feedlots need to be certified. The truck drivers now need to be certified. And then certainly they're looking for cattle. The feedlot guys that are already coming from ranches that are BQA certified. So it's a good program. They have it in Arizona and New Mexico, both. So if you have interest in getting training, let us know. We'll get something going. So kind of the crux of this all started with where to give shots. And this is the triangle of choice. And the reason that is mainly because there's not a lot of product generated from this in terms of cuts of meat from this area. And so it's in front of the shoulder and above the spinal column, but it's real important, and I see this happen a lot, that you give it below this ligament. Now, what this ligament does is it holds the animal's head up, but there's no vessels in there. It's just ligament tissue, okay? And I see people give it pretty high up, and if it goes in there, it's not really going to get absorbed very well. So you really want to shoot for this area right here. And here is on the calf. It's a lot smaller target, but still I recommend that you do all your shots at the neck on your calves. Under the armpits, handy. Under the skin is, you're giving it under the skin like they recommend, but there's not a lot of vessels there. And so the drug really doesn't get picked up as adequately as you want. And so ideally, take your muggers into account, make sure their knees are protected, and you're not going to give them a shot because blackleg hurts like a booger. But go ahead and give it in the neck of the calf. So there are some drugs that say they prefer that it goes in a muscle, but by and large, whether it be antibiotic or vaccine, they give you a subcutaneous alternative, which is under the skin, and that's the route you should always go. And so the other thing is to consider, particularly on antibiotics, is something like LA200 or Nuflor. When those calves and cows start getting big, you're talking 30, 40 cc's of drug up to 50, depending on the animal. So you get a bull with foot rot. And if you think about this, that's a lot of drug for an animal to absorb and utilize in their system. And so 2 things, you don't want to give more than 10 cc's in one location of any one drug. And you do want to keep it under the skin, but you want to still keep them a few inches apart. What I do when the bulls I work with at the bull test get to that 700-800 pounds and you're needing to give 40 cc's of a drug for a one-shot opportunity, I say, nope, it's worth keeping him around and busting that up into a couple days where he's only getting about 20 cc's in the one shot, and then we'll bring him back a couple days later and give him the rest of that dose, just to give him a break and allow that animal to adequately absorb all that drug. Excuse me, and take a drink. Needle size is also important to consider. Calves and sheep and goats don't have very thick hides. And then the vaccine itself is usually like water. So the lighter the gauge is, the higher the number. And you want to really stick with those light numbers on vaccines. And so for calves, goats, and sheep, that 18 to 20 gauge is more appropriate for them. And then on those cows and bulls with thicker hides, maybe go to a 16 if you need to, because you can break a lot of 18 gauges and you really don't want to break needles in animals. And so, on your mature animals, stick with a 16 gauge. Shorter, okay, so again, that hide is not very thick, so you can do 3/4 inch on the cows. You can even get away with maybe a 1/2 inch on your calves, but 3/4 inch covers just about everybody to get adequately under the skin. In terms of antibiotic, that stuff's more like syrup if you've ever been around it. And some drugs are exceptionally thick. And so you're still going to need about a 16 gauge to push that drug through, even in your calves. So SQ is subcutaneous. There's several different ways you can do this. You can tent. That way you know you're under the skin and want to avoid giving a drug in the skin. Certainly you'll know, because if you're in the skin, the drug's not going to push through the syringe. So you back out and then you go in again. You can do it that way. But on these shorter needles, you can really just go in at an angle and pretty well get under the skin safely without having to tent. It just depends on your comfort level and your facilities or your shoot equipment. So why do we do this? When did it start? It all started with beef quality assurance with the number of injection site lesions we were seeing in very expensive cuts of meat in the rounds. And so something had to be done different. And just to give you an appreciation of that, when I was at Colby, whenever we would either get a donated sick calf from a feedlot, or we would have our own chronic animal that would need to be euthanized, we would do a bit of an experiment, I guess you could say, in that we would inject either Banamine, which is anti-inflammatory, but it's highly, highly reactive in the muscle to the point that they require you to give it in the vein because of that, or LA200, Nuflor. All of these, some of these lower acting antibiotics are extremely reactive in the muscle. In this particular cow, I had given Banamine in the hip, and I'm not even in hide yet. I used an inch needle, and you can see the track of where that drug went and what it did to the muscle as a lesion. And this turns into just tough, nasty gristle. So imagine a customer cutting into that. And so really that is the gist of why we give the shots where we do. Okay, so again, coming back to the animal itself, with your opportunity to boost the immunity with weaning, that's your next opportunity. Probably the most stressful time for these animals, because they're getting separated from mom, they're getting thrown on a truck or put in a different pasture or going somewhere else. And so their cortisol levels are through the roof for several days. So one of the things you want to do is set them up to try and get them through this tough time with a good vaccination program. And if you started at branding and you have cows in good shape at calving, you're really setting these calves up for success, and that's what you want to do. And if your calves do well in the feedlot, that will attract your buyers to come back. But you can't forget the cow. Certainly, like I said, remember, there's a couple things why we want to keep boostering those cows. Now, when you're in open country, honestly, their risk of getting very sick. And when they get older, their immune system is more robust. And you don't often find very sick cows on a regular basis. And a lot of it is spatial, a lot of it is age. But that said, when you're giving boosters to your cows, you're ultimately, in some ways, improving the immunity in the fetus while she's pregnant. And so there is some transfer of immunity by vaccinating your cows, okay? And again, you want to stick with your protocol of a clostridial and a viral. Make sure that you read the labels, that they are safe for pregnant cows. And so doing that kind of sets your next calf crop up for success. You also don't want to forget the bull. And ideally, spring, when you're getting him breed sound tested by your veterinarian, you have to have him up in a sheet at some point during the year, I hope. I know this is a challenge at times, but it is worth it in many ways. It gives you an opportunity to booster his immunity as well with the clostridials, the viral, the reproductive vaccines. You can deworm him. And this is very important as well as it's related to health, is get that bull trick tested. We've been fighting this disease in the state for many, many years. We get hot spots here and there throughout the state. And when one breaks out, the impact financially it has on a single herd is fairly substantial. And so monitoring this disease in your herd, even though he can't be cured, if he comes up positive, he goes to town, he gets a T brand slapped on his rear end, and he will be a lifelong carrier of trichomoniasis. And so he can't stay in the herd, he won't clear of the disease. Cows can clear of the disease, given sexual rest or no exposure to bulls. And so this is something that's very important to monitor in terms of health management of your entire herd. And some say trick in, trick out, which means particularly if you're in a communal grazing situation, trick test at the time of your breed soundness exam, but it may not hurt to get him trick tested in the fall. And if he turns out to be positive in the fall, meaning he caught it somewhere, somehow during the summer, you don't have to winter that bull. You can send him down the road. He's not going to cost you a feed bill over the winter, but you will have to find a replacement for him. Oops, I meant to cut that one out. Okay, so in summary, this annual calendar is just a good idea to kind of get your schedule set. Keep everything kind of straight. We have those little red books that you do this in as well, because it does have a calendar, an annual calendar in there that you can jot down the days you want to vaccinate and with what. It also has a place to keep records of what you gave, when you gave it, and all that. Keep in mind that immunity starts in utero, meaning while the calf's gestating. And so you can boost that calf's immunity by vaccinating the cow. But if you keep her in good nutrition also, she's going to have the ability to produce good colostrum, which is the establishment of that calf's immunity. So if they don't get colostrum, they cannot survive. And again, like I said, keeping that cow in good shape with added nutrition, a little boost in her mineral program, likely, depending on the year, will help with that calf vigor. The modified lives are the drug of choice, if you will, the vaccine of choice to give, particularly to your young animals that really need help in developing a good, solid immune system on the viral diseases, okay? And you also want to certainly have your clostridials, your 7 and 8 way in that practice as well. Giving the boosters at weaning and will increase the immune response. And even though most of those calves are going to leave your ranch, keep in mind you've got some heifers you're probably going to keep back. So you want them as healthy as possible because they have been a big investment for you. handling, whether, like I said, at birth, branding, whenever you put hands on your animals, just be mindful of quiet and slow and less tools and all that, simply because there's such a positive impact of a calm animal and their effectiveness on being able to utilize not only the vaccines that you give them, but they really don't get sick as much. There's evidence to show that if you have a high-strung, nervous cow that gives you a high-strung, nervous calf, and they don't handle pressure at all, that those calves ultimately have sickness issues when they reach the feed yard. There's a lot of evidence to support that. So we don't want to create a herd of high-stress animals. And then I can't emphasize enough the success of a vaccination program, a health program, is through good record keeping. And so make a habit of it. And records are only so good as if you use them and you look back at them. So if a problem should arise, you can look at your history of what you have kept records of to see where that problem might have occurred and what might be causing it. So once again, I want to thank you all for your time and putting up with my noisy dogs and slides out of order and Monday on a Tuesday. But I do appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Marcy. So if you guys have some questions, raise your hand and you can directly ask them. If not, we do have our Q&A box and chat box available. I do have a question, Marcy, on the for cows. When you're deworming them, I know in spring you're using ivermectin, and you have to rotate them. What do you recommend using as dewormer in the fall for cows?
So we, at the bull test, we use a product called Cleanup. Now, the thing with Cleanup is it is only a parasite or a external wormer, and that's okay. And it does, I think, get liver flukes. But so ivermectin gets everything, right? External, internal. There's a few other products, Cydectin and Dectomax, that also are an all-inclusive wormer. But given an arid condition, honestly, if you're running into issues with lice or that kind of thing, Cleanup is really good for that. And we ultimately have a breakout of that about January. And so in the fall, we do Cleanup, the product. It's Cleanup 2, I think, and that's a pour-on. And this stuff is really gummy. We'll give you a heads up. It's very thick. So it looks like it's just sets on top of the cow's hair, but it does get in, and I can, as a testimonial, I can say it has worked very well. And then the other benefit of that is, if you are using something like an ivermectin or Dectomax or Cydectin product, this kind of gives an opportunity to just focus on the external without doing too much on the internal, because with open country, big pastures, your risks are quite low with that. But that said, at least once a year, we recommend a wormer. Probably in the spring is probably the best time, of like an ivermectin in the spring.
Right. Okay. So, like you mentioned, in January and that around the cooler times, I know that it can be, I know that the mange
Yep.
is an issue. And then toward fall, Dectomax is something we could, you can use it on calves. I know that. And then cattle as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going over and ivermectin.
Yeah. So, and changing those active ingredient drugs up, from Ivermectin to Cydectin, that's fine. That does help. But the big thing that causes resistance, both in sheep and cattle, is underdosing. So learning and having a really good feel of what your cattle weigh. I know that's kind of hard to do sometimes, but overall, I think we've been underdosing. You're probably in a little bit less trouble if you slightly overdose than if you underdose. So if you think your cows weigh 1,100 pounds, it would be probably safe to bump that to a 1,200 pound dose, because you'd be surprised at how heavy some of these cows might be getting. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you're calculating how much to give.
Right. Okay. And then also another question on the scours. You know your calf has it, or your lamb. You hit him. Is there scour medication, for immediate relief, or you just got to ride it through, or what?
No, I should have clarified that. So there's a couple drugs you can get over the counter still. One is called Corid, and that is what you put in a water source, and it's an anti-coccidiosis. It's a coccidiostat is what that's called. And then you can get Decox in your feed supply. That's also a coccidiostat additive. And that can be used if you think you're in high risk. If you start to see a bit of an outbreak, it would certainly not hurt to do that before other animals get infected. Keep your pens very clean, because like I said, it's highly contagious, and including people. So if you get a sick animal, wear gloves if you're going to treat him. They're probably going to need fluids. And then certainly those sulfa antibiotics work pretty well to clean up a coccidiosis infection. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Depending on what's easier, if you're not feeding, you could put it in a fixed water source that, isn't going to, that they can all drink out of, is a good way to do that.
Okay, great. I did have another question. As far, with calves, when you're weaning, you can use, your calf weaning plates and then eventually separate from the herd, for low stress. And then for the lambs, you can, I haven't seen any kind of weaning plates, but, it's kind of like a straight separation.
Yeah.
And I notice in some of the feeds, they have medicated and non-medicated. And so is that what you're referring to, to prevent scours? Is that what the medicated feed is?
So yes and no. So there is, and some guys will do this. You can get antibiotics in your feed stuff, and it's oxytetracycline, it's Tylan. There's a whole host of products that come in feed to kind of prevent the snotty noses and the respiratory. In terms of coccidiosis, the antibiotics can help that as well, but the coccidiostat is for that specific. Now, something to keep in mind, whether you're putting something in the coccidiostats, the Corid, and what I talked about, the Decox, you should still be able to get that over the counter. But whenever you add an antibiotic to a feedstuff or a water, that you can put in water, that now requires a veterinarian prescription. It's part of the veterinary feed directive that came out in 2017. And so if you feel like you want to incorporate this in your normal management, or if a problem crops up, you're going to have to call your veterinarian to get that feed stuff. And then what they do is they work with you and your feed supplier to get that product in. And it works very much like you having a prescription, right? So you'll figure out with him, say you need 20 sacks to get you the couple weeks you need to get over the hump. Then the feed store orders 20 sacks. And once you're out of that, then if you need more, you'll have to get another prescription for that additive feed. But decox should not fall under that. So the co-rid and the decox addition, I think you should still be able to get, because it's not really considered an antibiotic per se.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're running out of time here, Marcy, but thank you again for providing your presentation this evening. I don't think we have any other questions. So we'll go ahead and conclude this evening's presentation. And then if you guys would like the presentation from Marcy's presentation this evening, go ahead and email me there, or Sharon or Jana, and we can get it to you. And then also visit our Facebook page for more information on livestock, and then also on gardening. And then we do have some videos up there, and also USDA program information. And then if you've missed a webinar that we have hosted, you can go on our YouTube channel and find it on there. And then also, if you would like to receive a newsletter, a monthly newsletter, go ahead and send us an email. And then also, don't forget to fill out our evaluation. So when you exit, a screen will pop up, and go ahead and fill that out. That helps us plan for future presentations around you guys's needs. So with that, thank you again, Marcy, and thank you for the viewers for joining us. Everyone stay safe, and we will see you next week. We will have a presentation provided by Diné College covering cattle marketing. So look out for the information. Again, thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
The Native American Producers Success Project, or NAPS project in short, is a collaborative effort between Diné Inc., a nonprofit organization, the New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Services, and Diné College, Land Grant Office. This project is funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement and the Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. The NAPS project field staff consists of myself, our assistant coordinator, Sharon Sandman, and our technology media coordinator, Jana Johnson. So we do have some goals with the NAPS project. The overall goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers. To help us achieve this goal, there are some activities that we are currently providing in 4 key areas, which include improving Navajo farm and ranch operations through a series of workshops focusing on crop-related topics and livestock-related topics. We are also increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Services, Diné College Land Grant Office, and other professionals. We are also strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo Farmer Rancher Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers. So if you're interested in being part of the Congress, please contact us. And last but not least, facilitating Navajo farmers and ranchers' use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, and RMA programs. So